Let's look ahead, Dr. Sayers. 2022 World Cup taking place in Qatar. Now, Qatar won the bid to host this event back in 2010. Please tell me your initial reaction when you learned that Qatar had won the World Cup bid.
It was certainly interesting because it obviously raises a lot of questions. Not a traditional soccer country, but FIFA have always maintained that part of their objective.
Oh, why is that, sir? Please, because I didn't know it was a big deal until I was in grad school. Yeah. Why is Qatar not considered a traditional soccer country? Why were there questions raised when Qatar had won the bid?
So the initial questions were, how did they get it? They must be corrupt. They must have paid someone off. They announced Qatar and Russia at the same time. Mm-hmm. Russia 2018, Qatar 2022. Several other countries have bid. England had bid. Australia had bid. So obviously, to go back to your question about why is it not a traditional soccer country, or, they don't have a renowned league there. Okay. The national team hasn't really done it, because it's actually, it's a small population. Right. The game's not very developed in that country. But FIFA have long maintained that part of their objective is to grow the game in countries where it's not. It's why initially it came to USA in '94, South Africa in 2010.
Yes.
They are more and more now taking the game to areas where there's an opportunity for growth, which is wonderful. It's a game for all. Now, the climate the World Cup has always been operated in the summer.
May, June, July.
Yeah. Obviously, the temperature in Qatar at that time is very, very high. Mm-hmm. So there was question raised about that. How the players aren't going to be safe playing in that heat, playing in those conditions. And so the decision was made to move it to the winter. So now it starts late November, ends late December, which has never happened before. Mm-hmm. It's caused massive disruption to the global international calendar for football, because typically the World Cup's in the summer, because the leagues run from August to May. Yes. So now you've got to pause these
soccer around the globe, basically.
Exactly. Not only pausing soccer around the globe, but because soccer has become such a multi-billion-dollar industry, you're pausing this business model right in its middle, in the middle of it, and running the World Cup. Ultimately, they went ahead with the decision. They found ways to start somewhat earlier, change for the leagues, change the calendar so you have this break in the middle. But that caused uproar then, particularly within the countries that had bid and lost. Right. Because they said, well, we thought we were bidding on a summer World Cup. Mm-hmm. If we had the opportunity to bid on a winter World Cup, we either wouldn't have spent the millions of dollars that it cost us to put the bid together, right, or we'd have changed the bid so we could suit a winter World Cup. And so FIFA were threatened with all these lawsuits. Mm-hmm. But what the Qatar Association did was, as soon as they won the bid, another to go back to your original question, why was there uproar? So there's no stadiums in Qatar. Well, certainly not enough to host a World Cup.
A massive event.
And there wasn't infrastructure. There wasn't enough hotels. There wasn't transport systems in place. Yeah. And so, but because they're a very rich country, they had the money on hand to build. And so they immediately began construction on stadiums, on subway systems, to build them, but B, to be able to say to FIFA, if someone sued FIFA and said that the World Cup shouldn't be in Qatar, right, Qatar would come back and counter-sue FIFA and say, well, we've started all these construction projects because you told us the World Cup was going to be here. So it put FIFA at that point in a difficult position. But ultimately, it was settled that it would remain in Qatar. Right. And we're going to have this World Cup. This is essentially all going to be in one city. I think that there's the biggest distance between two stadiums, I think it's 45 minutes.
Wow.
which
Wow.
is typically, compare that to what we were talking about with the USA when you've got games in New York and games in Los Angeles.
Yes.
The Brazil World Cup was massive. That crossed time zones.
Dr. says with Qatar, there were reports that Qatar possibly paid out $200 million in bribes to win this bid.
Yeah.
I guess they paid off some FIFA executives. That's the reports. And then when you look at a place who doesn't have a tradition with soccer, didn't even have the facilities in place to host the event, it does look like some corruption may have went down.
To my knowledge, we don't have any evidence of corruption that did, but in terms of that particular awarding of the World Cup,
Yes.
But bigger picture, we do have proof that corruption has existed within FIFA before.
Yes.
One of the books we covered in the class, or in a later class. Sepp Blatter, who was the head of FIFA for a long time, and Michel Platini, who was a former French player, was head of UEFA for a long time, both received bans from football because they found an unethical deal in the millions of dollars between those two. So we know that it has existed before within FIFA. So it does certainly raise the question that did it exist there?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Qatar started to build facilities to host this world's event.
Yeah.
And there's some controversy there too, Dr. Sayers.
The human rights issues.
There's been all type of reports of human rights issues. There's been reports that possibly 6,500 migrant workers have died since these facilities started being built in 2010. The stories are they brought individuals from England, Nepal, Bangladesh, promised them jobs. Now, they have jobs building these infrastructures, but there's no housing, there's a lack of food, they're not being paid. Some people have had their passports confiscated, so they couldn't even go back home if they wanted. How do we reconcile, sitting down and enjoying this event that's about to take place, but knowing some of this stuff may have taken place to behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's certainly a point of contention and very much a topic of discussion. Obviously, there's a denial coming from that part of the world. These things have occurred. There are organizations that monitor human rights issues around the world that are claiming it did happen, or it has happened and is in some cases still happening. So it's certainly a question mark. I don't know of the evidence,
Right.
I'm not aware of it. But that entire region has had those questions asked of it previously. So, it's certainly whether more proof and evidence will come out later on, we'll see. But I'm aware of the conversations. Yeah.
There's also questions about the culture in Qatar. Where alcohol is not allowed. It's a Muslim country. Same-sex relationships are not welcome. But they are making concessions. They're going to be areas where I guess fans can enjoy alcohol, but public drunkenness, it's not allowed. Same-sex relationships, you can go to jail behind stuff like that. So it's going to be different. You got people come from all over the globe, different types of people. How do you think that's going to play out?
I think there's going to be such a volume of people, such an influx, that policing it sounds like it would be a challenge because there'd be just so many people in such a small area, relatively speaking. I don't know how it's going to go. It would appear there's going to have to be some sort of cooperation from both sides, in the sense that people traveling there should, without doubt, respect the traditions and the cultures of the country to which they're traveling. That should always happen, I think. From Qatar's part, they wanted to host the World Cup, and they agreed to host the World Cup after it was offered by FIFA. And I think when you do that, there's an understanding that there will be attendees from all over the globe, from very different cultures. And there are some themes or some behaviours, non-nefarious behaviours that occur when you do, when that amount of fans do get together to follow their national team. Drinking alcohol being one of them, for example, which I think that's why we've seen the bending from the Qatar authorities in that regard. So I don't know how it's going to pan out. It's going to be very interesting to see.